but new hate speech laws passed through the federal parliament. Now, this happened with barely an hour's discussion in the Senate. It started in the lower house yesterday, passed there, then went through to the Senate today where it was eventually passed. So this will now become law. Now, there are certain parts of it with which I agree and others with which I am really worried. It means that there will be mandatory minimum sentences of 6 years for terror offences, 3 years for financing terror, and 12 months for displaying terror symbols. But it then goes on to talk about inciting violence, essentially, and the means by which someone incites violence and the rules by which you have to meet if you are in court being accused of inciting violence. Now, they have watered this down to the point where you would question whether things you might just say in a normal conversation, joking half-heartedly, could essentially now be called inciting violence here in Australia. If you go to the criminal code, what they've changed is in section 80.2a. Now, it previously said that a person commits an offence if the first person, which is how they refer to it in the Act, intentionally urges, remember that, intentionally urges another person or a group to use force or violence against a group. That has now changed from intentionally urges to advocates, right? So there doesn't necessarily have to be intention anymore. The wording changes to advocate to water it down. You then get to the next bit, which says that the person does so intending that the force or violence will occur, i.e., you say, kill this bunch of people, etc., because you want people to do that. That now changes from intending that it will happen to reckless as to whether it will happen. So you could say something, perhaps jokingly, not meaning that it will happen, but if you are reckless to the fact that it could happen, you have, by the law, now incited violence. And the groups that we are talking about have also expanded. It used to be race, religion, nationality, national or ethnic origin, or political opinion. Well, now they insert into that sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, intersex status, and disability. Now, we all know there has been a scourge of anti-Semitism in this country, and we want something to be done about it. But this is being used as a vanguard to water down free speech and add in other protected groups, like the ones I just read out there. Sex, sexual orientation. Speaking of sexual orientation, Allegra Spender was talking about this legislation last night on 7:30. Now, she is talking here about a sign that was held up at a neo-Nazi rally, as she says. But that's not really pertinent to the sign that was held up. She'll explain the sign she thinks should be made illegal. Take a listen.
I support where the government is going with this legislation, but I want to go further, and that is the question I'm really trying to address is those people who are promoting and really pushing hate in our community. So currently under the current legislation, things like some neo-Nazi protests which had destroy pedo freaks as a banner, that wouldn't be covered under the current legislation.
Crying out loud.
So she wants destroy pedo freaks to be speech that is now considered a crime in Australia. I understand the idea that, you know, basically no one has been charged under hate speech laws, and I don't think that's a problem with the law necessarily. I think that's been an unwillingness from police to try the laws out. Yep. I mean, we're fiddling with laws here without really knowing the bounds of what can be done with them because they haven't actually been tested in court. So we jump the shark and now say that if you say something that is reckless or without, you know, reckless knowledge of what might happen, you could be up on an offence. I just wonder if, for instance, because sex is now included, right? Clementine Ford, a feminist commentator, many of you would know, used to quite frequently say, kill all men. Now, sex is now a protected group under this legislation. You say kill all men. She means it as a joke or ironically when she says it. But is she saying that reckless as to whether someone might go and then kill a man? So does that mean that sentence, which is from her a joke, is now a crime in Australia? Is this where we've gone?
So let's take that as a rhetorical question. Here's the bigger problem we've got in this country. As you pointed out, the Senate took all of 1 hour to review this legislation, which is not exactly simple. It's quite complicated in some of its detail. Our senators spent more time debating whether or not Donald Trump is a threat to the world than they did debating this legislation, which then has direct impacts upon things you post on social media, things you say to a mate over a beer at the pub, something you say outside your church or whatever. And so the Senate, which is meant to be a place of reviewing legislation, saying, is this good? What are the unintended consequences? Has just become all about rubber stamping legislation according to which senator, which party each senator belongs to. It's quite derelict in their duty of our senators to wave through legislation, which you've so brilliantly described has got all sorts of problems with it. How do you interpret it? What does it mean? To wave it through without doing due diligence.
And these things are never tested until it's before a court, until someone brings a case. And then, of course, the judge in control of that simply is held by the bounds, and then you've got a precedent set. Because either the judge said it applies or it doesn't apply, hence the cases build up, and then lawyers have precedents to rely on. It's utterly insane. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I'm a free speech absolutist. I really am. You can't have free speech without hate speech. You either have both or neither. And as we know, anything that's even incitement, how do you measure incitement? Now that they've taken intent out of it, one would think, because that lowers the bar. Intent is very hard to prove. I can say I was joking. You can say I was dead serious and my intent was to cause you grievous bodily harm. Who's to say? So they've removed that now, and all that matters is that I said it and the rest is up to the judge. I mean, it's just a can of worms. I genuinely find it disgusting that we have any of these kinds of bills, well, now laws, in our country at all. It does not belong in a free democracy.